I was cheated out of my own business. But I started again from my kitchen to bleed. Lawyer slid the documents across his polished desk and told me I had no legal recourse, that the signatures I'd trusted were the ones that sealed my fate. My business partner of 8 years, the woman I'd considered my closest friend, had used a clause I didn't fully understand to buy me out for a fraction of what I'd built, what we'd built together, or so I thought. I sat in that office with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at paperwork that proved my name could be erased from something I'd poured my entire soul into, and I felt a hollowness I'd never experienced before. The bakery we'd started in a tiny storefront grew into 3 locations, built from early mornings and burned hands, and 1,000 small decisions I'd made, thinking we were partners. In every sense, it was hers now, legally and completely. I walked out into afternoon sunlight carrying a folder of documents. I couldn't afford to fight. And all I could think was that I'd been so focused on baking the perfect croissant, on making customers smile, on building something beautiful, that I never saw her building an exit strategy that didn't include me. My name is Diane, and I'm 56 years old, living in a rented duplex with a kitchen that's too small and a dining table that's become my entire world. I spent the last 3 months sitting at that table staring at my laptop, at blank business plans and half-written emails, trying to figure out how to rebuild from nothing, when nothing is all you have left. The duplex is temporary, a place I moved to after selling my house to cover legal fees. That didn't change the outcome, just delayed my understanding that some betrayals are perfectly legal. I've been a baker since I was 23. Started as a pastry assistant at a hotel restaurant and worked my way up through obsessive practice and genuine love for the craft. There's something almost meditative about working with dough, about understanding how flour and butter and time can transform into something that makes people pause and savor. I specialized in laminated pastries, the kind that require patience and precision, hundreds of delicate layers that shatter perfectly when you bite into them. That attention to detail, that willingness to do the tedious work most people skip, became my signature. My mornings now start around 6, earlier than necessary, since I have nowhere to be. But my body remembers the baker's schedule and won't let me sleep past dawn. I make coffee in a French press I've had for 15 years, sit at the kitchen table, still in my pajamas, and try to summon the energy to face another day of starting over. The table is scratched and wobbly, came with the furnished duplex, but it's become my office, my workspace, my planning station. I've covered it with notebooks, recipe cards, business magazines, printouts of cottage food laws. I'm trying to understand. I have a cat named Butter, an elderly calico who made the move with me from the house. Confused by the smaller space, but adaptable in the way cats are. She sits on the table sometimes while I work, batting at my pen, reminding me to take breaks I don't want to take. Taking care of her gives structure to days that otherwise might dissolve into obsessive planning or paralyzing despair. She doesn't know about the betrayal, doesn't care about business law or broken partnerships, just wants her breakfast and a warm lap. And sometimes that simplicity is exactly what I need. The kitchen in this duplex is laughably small compared to the commercial kitchens I've worked in for decades. The oven is unreliable, heating unevenly in ways that require constant monitoring. The counter space is minimal, maybe 3 feet of usable surface. There's no commercial mixer, no proofing cabinet, no walk-in refrigerator, just standard apartment appliances that seem almost toy-like after years of professional equipment. But it's mine to use, and the cottage food laws in my state allow me to bake certain items from home to sell. And that narrow permission has become the crack through which I'm trying to rebuild my entire life. I've been testing recipes in this inadequate kitchen for weeks now, adapting techniques I learned in professional settings to work with home equipment. Making croissants in a residential oven requires different timing, different temperature management, more attention to how heat distributes. I've burned more batches than I want to admit, filling the duplex with smoke that sets off the alarm and brings my concerned neighbor knocking. But slowly, stubbornly, I'm figuring it out. Learning these new limitations the way I once learned professional ones. The dining table where I work is positioned near a window that faces the street. And I've started recognizing the rhythms of the neighborhood. The couple next door who leaves for work at 7:15. The retired man across the street who tends his garden every morning. The mail carrier who arrives at 1:30. These small observations ground me, remind me that life continues in its ordinary patterns even when your own life has been upended. Sometimes I wave at the neighbors and they wave back. And those tiny exchanges feel like proof I still exist in the world. Comment below if you've ever had to start completely over after losing something you built. Don't forget to subscribe. This story is about discovering what you're made of when everything is stripped away. I met Rebecca 12 years ago at a food industry conference. Both of us attending a seminar on small business sustainability. She was starting a consulting business for bakeries, had an MBA in business experience I lacked, and we struck up a conversation over terrible conference coffee. She was smart and enthusiastic, saw potential in the industry that matched my passion for the craft. We exchanged information, stayed in touch, and when I mentioned I'd been dreaming of opening my own place, she suggested we partner. Her business expertise combined with my baking skill. The partnership made sense on paper. I contributed my recipes, my reputation in the local food scene, my willingness to work 18-hour days perfecting products. She contributed startup capital, business planning, connections with investors and suppliers. We signed partnership agreements that her lawyer drafted, documents I skimmed rather than studied, trusting that we wanted the same things, that our shared vision would protect us both. The first bakery opened 8 years ago in a neighborhood on the edge of gentrification. A small storefront with exposed brick and vintage light fixtures, Rebecca insisted, would attract the right demographic. I'd wanted something simpler, more focused on the product than the aesthetic. But she convinced me that atmosphere mattered, that we were selling an experience, not just pastries. She was right. Customers came for the Instagram-worthy interior and stayed for the croissants that actually lived up to the hype. Those first years were brutal but exhilarating. I'd arrive at 3 in the morning to start the baking, work until mid-afternoon, then return home to develop new recipes and plan the next day's production. Rebecca handled everything else: marketing, finances, vendor relationships, expansion planning. I trusted her completely, grateful to focus on what I loved while she managed aspects of business that overwhelmed me. When she suggested opening a second location, I hesitated, worried about maintaining quality. But she assured me we could hire skilled bakers, that my job would be oversight and recipe development. The second bakery opened 3 years after the first, in a more upscale neighborhood with higher rent and higher expectations. Then a third location 2 years later, each one beautiful and successful, our name becoming synonymous with the best pastries in the city. I was proud, but also increasingly stretched thin, running between locations, trying to maintain standards, training bakers who could execute my recipes, barely sleeping. Rebecca kept pushing for more: a fourth location, wholesale accounts, maybe even franchising. I wanted to consolidate, to perfect what we had, but she said growth was how we stayed relevant, how we built real value. I started noticing small things that didn't quite align. Bills that seemed higher than they should be. Vendor relationships that Rebecca said she'd handled but that vendors claimed were unresolved. Financial reports I didn't fully understand, but that showed profits lower than our packed bakeries suggested they should be. When I asked questions, Rebecca had explanations that sounded reasonable, talked about overhead and expansion costs and long-term investment. I wanted to trust her, needed to trust her, because admitting doubt would mean acknowledging how vulnerable I'd made myself. The warning signs became harder to ignore in the months before everything collapsed. Rebecca started talking about bringing in outside investors, said we needed capital for the expansion she'd been planning. She presented it as an opportunity, a chance to really scale the business, but something in her tone felt off. She avoided eye contact when I asked for details, changed the subject when I pressed about what outside investment would mean for our partnership structure. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of running 3 locations was making me suspicious of someone who'd been nothing but supportive. The truth came out when she scheduled a meeting with lawyers present, a detail that should have alarmed me, but that she framed as standard procedure for the investment deal. The lawyers explained that Rebecca had been structuring the business finances in ways I didn't understand, that the partnership agreement I'd signed gave her majority decision-making power in scenarios I hadn't imagined. She'd found investors willing to buy into the business, but the deal required buying out my stake at a valuation far below market rate. The clause in our agreement gave her the right to force the buyout if she deemed it necessary for business growth. I sat in that conference room, listening to lawyers use words like fiduciary, responsibility and business judgment rule while Rebecca avoided looking at me. She'd brought documents for me to sign, papers that would finalize my exit from the business we'd built together. When I said I needed time to consult my own lawyer, to understand what was happening, she said the investors needed an answer within 48 hours or the deal was off. It felt like hostage negotiation, my own business being used as leverage against me. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford, using credit cards to pay the retainer, desperate for someone to tell me there was a way to fight this. He reviewed the partnership agreement, the financial documents, the buyout offer, and his expression grew grimmer with each page. He said Rebecca had been planning this for at least a year, that the financial structuring wasn't accidental, that she'd positioned herself to execute exactly this scenario. He said I could fight it, take it to court, but litigation would cost more than I'd likely win. And the agreement I'd signed was tight enough that my chances weren't good. The amount she offered was insulting, barely enough to cover my legal consultation. A fraction of what my recipes and reputation had contributed to 3 thriving locations. My lawyer said I could refuse, could let the whole thing go to court and watch the business potentially crumble in the legal battle, or I could accept the terms and at least walk away with something. I asked what he'd do, and he looked tired and said he'd probably take the money and start over. That sometimes cutting your losses is the only rational choice, even when it feels like surrender. I called Rebecca one last time, hoping to appeal to our friendship, to the years we'd worked side by side building something we'd both believed in. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professionally pleasant, like I was a vendor she needed to manage. I asked her why she'd do this, why the business meant more than 8 years of partnership. She said it wasn't personal, that she'd seen an opportunity to maximize value and had taken it, that I should understand it was just business. I said it stopped being just business the first time I trusted you. And she said, that's why you should never mix friendship with business. Diane, and hung up. I signed the papers 2 days later, my hand shaking so badly, the lawyer had to steady the page. I initialed every clause that stripped my name from the business, signed away rights to recipes I'd spent years perfecting, agreed not to compete within a 20-mile radius for 2 years. The non-compete was the cruelest part, meaning I couldn't open another bakery in the city where I'd built my reputation, couldn't even get hired at competing establishments. I was effectively exiled from my own career in my own city. The day the buyout finalized, I drove past all 3 locations one last time. The bakeries looked exactly the same, the signs still bearing the name we'd chosen together. Customers lined up outside the way they always were. Nothing about them revealed that I no longer existed in their story, that the croissants being sold were my recipes executed by bakers I'd trained, but that I'd never benefit from again. I sat in my car across from the original location, the one we'd opened 8 years earlier with such hope and terror, and I cried until I had no tears left. My reputation in the local food community evaporated almost immediately. Rebecca controlled the narrative, told people I'd chosen to exit the partnership, that I wanted to pursue other opportunities. When I tried to correct the story, to explain what actually happened, people looked uncomfortable, changed the subject, clearly didn't want to be involved in business drama. Some took her side, said I should have read the contracts more carefully, that business is business, and I'd been naive. Others simply ghosted me, unwilling to risk their relationship with a successful businesswoman by staying loyal to someone with no leverage. I spent weeks in a depression so heavy I could barely leave bed. I'd sold my house to pay legal fees that accomplished nothing except confirming my helplessness. I'd burned through savings covering bills while the legal process dragged on. I had no business, no income, no clear path forward, and a non-compete that prevented me from doing the only work I knew how to do. I applied for baking jobs outside the restricted radius, but word had spread, and potential employers saw me as either a liability or someone who'd demand wages they couldn't afford given my experience level. My daughter called weekly from Boston, worried, offering to send money. I couldn't bring myself to accept. She was building her own career, her own life, and I didn't want to become her burden. She said I should sue, should fight harder. Couldn't understand why I was accepting defeat. I tried to explain that fighting required resources I didn't have, that the legal system favors whoever can afford better lawyers, that sometimes justice and legality aren't the same thing. She thought I was giving up. Maybe I was. 3 months after signing away my business, I was sitting at my kitchen table eating cereal for dinner when I noticed a flyer someone had left on my doorstep. It was advertising a local farmer's market looking for new vendors, including bakers working under cottage food licenses. I almost threw it away, but something made me actually read it. Look up the cottage food laws in my state, understand what I could legally produce and sell from a home kitchen. The regulations were strict. Certain products only, specific labeling requirements, sales caps that seemed impossibly low. But they were something, a narrow legal channel through which I could start baking again without violating the non-compete. Cottage food laws exempted home bakers from commercial kitchen requirements, and the farmer's market was technically outside my restricted radius. I spent that evening researching, taking notes, feeling the first spark of possibility I'd felt in months. I started small, testing what I could produce with limited equipment. Croissants were out. They required proofing conditions I couldn't maintain in a home kitchen. But I could make scones, biscuits, certain cookies, items that showcase technique without requiring commercial infrastructure. I experimented with flavors that felt distinctive, combinations that would set me apart from the other bakers who'd be at the market. Lavender lemon scones, brown butter chocolate chip cookies, rosemary parmesan biscuits. Items that told a story about craftsmanship and care. The first farmer's market was humbling. I had a folding table, a handmade sign, products and packaging I'd designed myself and printed at the library. Other vendors had professional setups, established customer bases, confidence I was faking through sheer stubbornness. I sold $43 worth of baked goods that first day, barely enough to cover my table fee and ingredients. But 3 people asked for my contact information, said they'd like to order for events or parties, and that tiny interest felt like a lifeline. I started saying yes to every opportunity. Baking for a neighbor's baby shower, providing dessert for a book club meeting, making custom orders for birthdays and anniversaries. Each job was small, barely profitable after accounting for ingredients and time. But they were building something, a new reputation, a customer base, proof that I could still create value even without commercial kitchens and business partners. I set up a basic website using a free template, taught myself social media marketing through YouTube videos and trial and error. I posted photos of my baking process, shared stories about ingredients and techniques, slowly built a following of people who appreciated craft over convenience. The audience was tiny compared to what the bakeries had reached, but these followers were engaged, loyal, genuinely interested in what I was building. The non-compete became almost irrelevant as I carved out this new niche. I wasn't competing with commercial bakeries, wasn't even really in the same market. I was offering something more personal, more artisanal, products you couldn't buy in a storefront because they were made to order in small batches with attention I could only provide at home scale. This wasn't the business I'd lost, but it was becoming something else, something that belonged entirely to me. I started teaching baking classes from my duplex kitchen, something the cottage food laws permitted. Groups of 4 students maximum, learning to make the items I'd perfected over decades. I charged $75 per person, and the classes filled up within hours of posting them. Teaching reminded me how much I love sharing knowledge, helping people understand the science and art behind what seemed like simple recipes. My students became customers, then advocates, telling their friends, spreading word about this baker working from her home. A year after the betrayal, I was delivering an order to a corporate client when I ran into Rebecca. She was at the same office building, there for a catering pitch meeting, carrying samples from what used to be our bakeries. We stood in the lobby facing each other, both of us frozen in that awkward recognition. She looked polished and successful, carrying professional packaging with the bakery's logo prominent. I was holding a simple cardboard box with my hand-labeled products, clearly operating at a different scale. She said my name with false warmth, asked how I was doing, her eyes scanning my simple setup with barely concealed judgment. I said I was doing well, that I'd started a home baking business, that it was small but growing. She said that was nice, her tone suggesting anything but. Then she mentioned she'd heard I was doing cottage food sales, said she hoped I was following all the regulations, that she'd hate to hear I was having legal problems. The threat was subtle but clear. She was reminding me she could make things difficult if I stepped out of bounds. Something shifted in me in that moment. I looked at her with her professional samples and her implied threats, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not the desperate need for her approval or acknowledgement of what she'd done. She'd won the battle for the business, but she hadn't beaten me. I was still baking, still creating, still building something that mattered, even if it looked different than what we'd had. I told her the business looked successful, wished her luck with her meeting, and walked to my client's office without looking back. The client I was delivering to was the marketing director for a regional grocery chain, someone who'd found me through Instagram and wanted to try my biscuits for a potential partnership. She opened the box and immediately commented on the texture, the flavor, the clear quality. She said they'd been looking for a local baker to provide fresh baked goods for their stores, something artisanal that would differentiate them from competitors. She asked if I'd be interested in discussing a wholesale contract. I almost said no automatically, remembering my limitations, the small kitchen, the cottage food caps on production volume. But she explained they weren't looking for huge volume, wanted small batch products that could be marketed as handmade and local. They'd help me transition from cottage food to commercial licensing, would connect me with a shared commercial kitchen space. They worked with other small producers. The contract would be enough to make this business actually sustainable, to move from survival to stability. I went home and did the math, calculated what I'd need to rent commercial kitchen time, what equipment I could afford used, what production volume I could handle alone. The numbers were tight but workable. I'd be starting over in commercial baking, but this time without a partner, without complicated agreements, without trusting anyone but myself. The business would be smaller, more focused, entirely mine in ways the bakeries never were. The grocery chain contract started small biscuits and scones delivered 3 times a week to 5 locations. I rented time at a shared commercial kitchen, worked odd hours around other bakers' schedules, learned to be efficient in ways I never had to be with my own facilities. The work was exhausting but satisfying, every product carrying my name alone. Every success or failure entirely my responsibility. 6 months after starting the wholesale contract, I had steady enough income to rent my own small commercial kitchen space. Nothing fancy but mine to schedule and organize as I needed. I hired one part-time assistant, a young baker eager to learn, and I trained her the way I'd once trained staff at the bakeries, but without the pressure of rapid expansion. We produced quality over quantity, building a reputation for consistency and craft. 2 years after the betrayal, my business is small but stable. I operate from a modest commercial kitchen, supply 3 grocery chains with baked goods, teach regular baking classes, take custom orders for events. My annual revenue is a fraction of what the 3 bakeries generated, but all of it is mine. No partner to answer to, no complicated profit sharing, no vulnerability to someone else's decisions. I've learned to appreciate the smallness of my operation. I know every customer who orders regularly, can adjust recipes based on feedback, can make decisions quickly without committee approval. When someone emails to say my biscuits made their Sunday breakfast special, that feedback comes directly to me, feels personal in a way. Running 3 locations, never allowed. I'm baking for people again, not for investors or expansion plans. The non-compete expired last month, technically allowing me to open a storefront in the city again, but I have no desire to. The model I've built works for my life now, allows me to control my hours, manage my stress, focus on craft over scale. I could grow bigger, hire more staff, chase expansion, but I've learned that bigger isn't always better, that there's honor in doing a few things well rather than many things adequately. My relationship with food has shifted. In the commercial bakeries, I'd stopped actually enjoying baking, had become so focused on systems and efficiency and training others that I'd lost touch with why I loved this work. Now, working in my small kitchen with my one assistant, I remember what drew me to baking in the first place. The alchemy of simple ingredients becoming something greater. The satisfaction of feeding people, the meditative rhythm of repetitive tasks done with care. I still see Rebecca's bakeries around the city. Still notice when they open new locations or get media coverage. I feel nothing looking at them, no longing or resentment, just mild curiosity about a business I used to be part of. They're successful and probably will continue to be, but they're not mine, and I've made peace with that. Built something different that fits who I am now rather than who I was then. My daughter visited last month and helped in the kitchen for a weekend, working beside me the way she used to as a teenager when I'd bring her to early morning baking sessions. She said she was proud of me, not for the business specifically, but for starting over, for refusing to let betrayal define my future. We talked about resilience, about how surviving isn't just about enduring, but about adapting, finding new forms when old ones become impossible. I'm 58 now. 2 years passed, the betrayal that felt like an ending, but turned out to be a different kind of beginning. My kitchen table that once served as my entire office is just a dining table again, though I still sometimes sit there in the morning with coffee, planning the day's production, refining recipes, thinking about what's next. The table feels different now, less weighted with desperation, more simply functional. What I've learned is that business partnerships require more than trust and shared vision. They require clear legal understanding, equal power dynamics, protection against scenarios you hope won't happen but need to prepare for anyway. I was naive, thinking friendship would protect me, that good intentions mattered more than contracts. That naivety cost me almost everything. But the education has been worth the price, even though I wouldn't choose to pay it again. I've also learned that losing something you built doesn't mean you've lost the ability to build. The skills that created the first business still existed after it was taken, the knowledge and craft and work ethic transferable to new ventures. Rebecca took the physical businesses, the locations and brand and infrastructure, but she couldn't take what actually generated value. My hands, my recipes, my understanding of how flour and butter and time becomes something people want to buy. There's a particular kind of freedom in starting over with nothing to lose. The first time I built a business, I was cautious, careful, afraid of making mistakes. This second time, having already experienced catastrophic failure, I'm bolder, more willing to experiment, less attached to outcomes beyond my control. The worst already happened, and I survived it, which somehow makes everything else less frightening. I've become an advocate for other small food producers, especially women trying to navigate cottage food laws and farmers markets, and the complicated journey from home baker to commercial producer. I teach classes not just on baking technique, but on business basics, contract review, protecting yourself legally in partnerships. I tell them my story not for sympathy, but as cautionary tale, so they avoid the mistakes I made, so they understand that paperwork matters more than promises. The baking industry hasn't forgotten what happened, though the story has softened in retellings. Some people still treat me with sympathy. That feels condescending. Poor Diane, who got taken advantage of. Others respect what I've built afterward, see the comeback as proof of character. A few have reached out privately to say they had similar experiences, betrayals in business they couldn't speak about publicly. And those conversations have helped me understand how common this story is. How many people restart after being pushed out of things they built? My small business won't make me wealthy or famous, won't expand into multiple locations or franchise opportunities, but it pays my bills, allows me to do work I love, operates on principles I can stand behind without compromise. I employ people fairly, maintain quality without cutting corners, build relationships with customers based on actual value rather than marketing. These might seem like basic standards, but they're harder to maintain than they sound. Require constant choices to prioritize integrity over expedience. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, standing there about to sign that partnership agreement, I'd say read every word, hire your own lawyer, protect yourself even against people you trust. But I'd also say that even if you don't, even if you make the naive mistakes I made, you'll survive the consequences, rebuild from rubble, discover strengths you didn't know you had. The betrayal won't destroy you unless you let it. And starting over isn't the same as starting from nothing, because you carry forward everything you've learned. I make croissants again now, having figured out how to produce them in my commercial kitchen, despite the challenges. They're not the same as the ones I made in the bakeries. These are smaller batches, different hydration, adapted to my current equipment and workflow. But they're mine, completely. Every recipe decision, every production choice, every butter lamination executed according to my standards alone. When I pull a tray from the oven and see those perfect golden layers, I feel satisfaction that has nothing to do with profit margins or expansion plans. Just the simple pride of craft executed well. I pour my morning coffee now in my small duplex kitchen, butter weaving between my legs, expecting breakfast. Sunlight coming through the window over the table that once held all my desperate planning. My commercial kitchen opens at 6, and I need to start the morning's production, a routine I've built that feels sustainable, purposeful, entirely my own. The business Rebecca took is thriving somewhere across town, but so is the business I've built from its ashes, smaller but uncompromised, limited but free. I am not what I was, But I am enough, and that simple truth tastes sweeter than any pastry I've ever made.